The California sun streamed through the wide windows of the Curry mansion in Atherton, creating golden patterns on the polished wooden floor. Ayesha Curry was enjoying a rare morning of tranquility, with the children at school and Steph traveling with the Golden State Warriors for a series of away games. She decided to use the time to organize some boxes that had been relegated to the basement during the last renovation. "It's high time I dealt with all of this," she murmured to herself as she descended the stairs with a cup of tea in her hands. The basement, unlike the rest of the impeccable residence, was filled with stacked boxes and items stored over the years. Steph's trophies, mementos of her culinary achievements, family photos, and children's memories occupied shelves and corners. Ayesha smiled as she ran her fingers over a small basketball shoe that had belonged to Riley, now 11 years old. While reorganizing a built-in cabinet, her eye was drawn to a black box she had never seen before. Unlike the others, this one was carefully sealed and positioned at the back, almost invisible to anyone not specifically looking for it. "How strange," she said softly, pulling the box out. It was heavy and had no label. For a moment, Ayesha hesitated, feeling an inexplicable apprehension. She and Steph had always had a relationship based on trust and transparency. There had never been secrets in their almost 13 years together. With a sigh, she broke the seal on the meat box. Inside, she found folders organized by year, all identified only by numbers. She began to leaf through the documents, finding bank statements from an account she didn't recognize, regular transfers to Charlotte, North Carolina, and photos of an unidentified building. Contracts, legal documents, all signed by Steph, but through a company she had never heard of. "Curry Legacy Holdings?" she murmured, confused, feeling her heart accelerate. Further down, she found a folder with photos. In one of them, Steph appeared next to an unknown man, smiling in front of the same building from the other documents. The photo was dated 2014, almost 11 years ago. In the bank transfers, substantial amounts were sent monthly since then. Ayesha's hands began to tremble as she connected the facts. For 11 years, her husband had maintained some kind of secret operation, sending money to Charlotte, his hometown. What could be so important to justify this secret? Why had Steph never mentioned anything about this? Ayesha's mind traveled back to the day they reunited in Los Angeles. She was only 23, and Steph was beginning to stand out in the NBA. The shy boy she had met at church as a teenager had transformed into a promising athlete. She remembered their wedding in 2011, the birth of Riley, Ryan, and Cannon. All the nights they talked about their dreams, plans, and hopes. At no point had Steph mentioned this secret. The shrill ring of the telephone interrupted her thoughts. It was Sonia, Steph's mother. "Ayesha, dear, how are the children?" asked the warm voice on the other end of the line. They're fine, Sonia," Ayesha replied, trying to disguise the tremor in her voice. "Is everything okay? You sound upset." "Just tired. I'm organizing some things in the basement." "I understand. Listen, I'm calling to confirm dinner on Sunday. Dell and I are looking forward to seeing you all." Ayesha responded mechanically, her mind still on the open folders in front of her. Did Sonia know about this? Or was it a secret that Steph kept even from his family? "Sonia," she began hesitantly, "do you know if Steph maintains any business in Charlotte?" There was a pause on the other end. "Not that I know of, dear. Why?" "Nothing important. I just found some old papers and was curious," Ayesha deflected, deciding not to share her discovery before speaking with Steph himself. After hanging up, she carefully stored the documents in the box and went up to the couple's bedroom. She sat on the edge of the king-size bed, holding one of the photos between her fingers. 11 years of secrecy. Why would Steph hide something for so long? Was it another family? A child she didn't know about? The idea made her stomach turn. No, Steph wouldn't do that. There had to be another explanation. But then, why the secret? The tears finally came, silent at first, then in sobs that shook her shoulders. Ayesha hugged a pillow, trying to muffle the crying, so that the staff working in the house wouldn't hear. At that moment, she questioned not only what she had discovered, but everything she thought she knew about her marriage and the man she had chosen as her life partner. The sun was already setting when Ayesha finally got up, wiped away her tears, and made a decision. She would wait for Steph's return the next day and confront him. After 11 years, she deserved to know the truth, however painful it might be. "Who are you really, Steph Curry?" she whispered to the photo of her husband on the nightstand, the familiar smile now seeming to hide secrets she had never imagined existed. The familiar sound of the security system announcing the opening of the electronic gate made Ayesha straighten up in the kitchen chair. It was almost 8 in the evening, and the children were finishing dinner under her silent supervision. All day, she had mentally rehearsed the confrontation, alternating between anger, fear, and a terrible sense of betrayal. "Daddy's home!" shouted Cannon, the youngest of the 3 children, jumping from his chair with the typical enthusiasm of his 5 years. "Finish your dinner first, Cannon," Ayesha instructed, her voice betraying the tension she was trying to hide. Riley, the oldest and most perceptive of the children, gave her mother a questioning look. "You've been strange since yesterday, Mom. Did something happen?" Ayesha forced a smile. "Just tired, dear. Nothing to worry about." The front door opened, and Steph entered, carrying his travel bag. Despite the evident exhaustion on his face, the result of 3 consecutive away games, his eyes lit up at seeing his family. "Hey, Team Curry!" he exclaimed, opening his arms to receive Cannon, who had run to hug him, completely ignoring his mother's instruction. Ryan, the middle child, followed her brother, wrapping her father's legs in a tight hug. Only Riley remained at the table, observing the interaction with a maturity beyond her years, sensing that something was out of place. Ayesha stood up and offered Steph a brief smile, without the usual warm hug. Their eyes met briefly, and she noticed the confusion in her husband's gaze at the subdued reception. "Welcome back," she said simply. "We've already had dinner, but I saved a plate for you." During the meal, Steph tried to fill the uncomfortable silence by telling stories about the trip and asking about the children's activities over the past few days. Ayesha participated, minimally, responding only when necessary. The atmosphere was charged with a tension that even Cannon could perceive. "Why are you both so quiet?" the boy asked innocently, looking from one parent to the other. "Daddy's tired from the trip, and Mommy had a full day too," Steph replied, exchanging a meaningful look with Ayesha. "How about we watch a movie before bed?" After the movie, with the children finally in bed, the couple found themselves alone in the living room. Steph poured himself a glass of water and sat on the couch, looking at Ayesha with concern. "What's going on, Ayesha? You've barely spoken to me since I arrived." Without words, she got up and left the room. Steph waited, confused, until his wife returned with the black box she had discovered in the basement. She placed it on the coffee table between them. "I found this yesterday," she finally said, her voice low and controlled. "Care to explain what Curry Legacy Holdings is and why you've been sending money to Charlotte for the past 11 years without ever mentioning it to me?" Steph's face visibly paled. His hands, so steady on the basketball court, trembled slightly as he looked at the open box. "Where did you find this?" he asked in a low voice. "In the basement, hidden behind some boxes," Ayesha replied, crossing her arms. "That's not the issue, Steph. What is this? Why the secret? Is there another family I don't know about?" The last question came out in a painful whisper, the tears she had contained all day finally overflowing. Steph stood up abruptly. "No, Ayesha, how could you think that? Never, ever!" He approached to touch her, but she backed away. "Then explain to me," she demanded. 11 years, Steph. 11 years of lies." He closed his eyes for a moment, seeming to gather courage. "They're not lies, just a secret I thought was better to keep," he finally said, sitting down again. "It all started in 2014, after my first selection to the All-Star game." Steph began to explain how he had returned to Charlotte for the event and reconnected with people from his past. He spoke about an idea that had emerged, a personal project that continued to this day. "It's an initiative I created," he explained, carefully choosing his words. "Something important to me, but that I preferred to keep separate from my public life, from the media, and yes, even from you." "Why?" Ayesha's voice broke with the question. "We're married, Steph. We've built a life together. I thought we shared everything." Steph ran his hands over his face, visibly distressed. "I wanted to tell you so many times, but the more time passed, the harder it became to explain why I kept it secret for so long." "So that's it? You don't trust me?" The tears now flowed freely down Ayesha's face. "I trust you more than anyone in the world," Steph replied, his own voice breaking. "But this project, it's different. It's personal, in a way I can't even explain." "Try," insisted Ayesha. "Because right now, I'm imagining the worst possible scenarios." Steph looked long at the documents spread on the table, then at his wife's hurt face. He made a decision. "I can't adequately explain with words," he finally said. "I need to show you. Let's go to Charlotte tomorrow. I'll take you to the location, and then you'll understand everything." "Charlotte? Tomorrow?" Ayesha shook her head, confused. "The kids have school. You have practice." "This is more important," interrupted Steph firmly. "I'll call the coach in the morning. As for the kids, your parents can stay with them for a day or two. Please, Ayesha, trust me one last time." The silence that followed seemed to last an eternity. Finally, Ayesha nodded slowly. "One last chance, Steph. But I want the whole truth." That night, lying in the same bed, but separated by an emotional abyss, Ayesha remained awake, observing her husband's profile in the dark, questioning if she really knew him. 11 years of marriage, 3 children, countless shared victories and defeats. And yet, there was a part of Steph Curry she had never known. The thought kept her awake until dawn, her heart divided between the fear of the truth and the desperate need to know it. The private jet took off from San Francisco Airport under a cloudy sky, reflecting the emotional climate between its only 2 passengers. Steph absently piloted his tablet, while Ayesha stared fixedly out the window, watching California disappear beneath the clouds. The silence between them was punctuated only by the constant hum of the engines and occasional announcements from the pilot. "The kids were disappointed we're not going to Riley's science fair today," Ayesha finally commented, breaking the tense silence. Steph looked up. "I know. I promised her we'd make it up to her. This is important, Ayesha. Important enough to keep secret for 11 years, she replied, unable to hide the hurt in her voice. Steph put the tablet, aside and unfastened his seatbelt to sit beside his wife. "Remember when we reconnected in Los Angeles?" he asked softly. "You had just moved to pursue your acting career, and I was in my second year with the Warriors." Ayesha nodded, the memory clear in her mind. The unexpected reunion with the boy she had met at church as a teenager, now a promising athlete, had completely changed the course of her life. "Back then, I was still trying to prove my worth in the NBA," continued Steph. "Everyone said I was too small, too fragile for the professional game." "But you proved them wrong," said Ayesha, turning to face him. "Yes, but it wasn't easy. Do you remember my ankle injuries? How they almost ended my career before it really began?" Ayesha remembered vividly. Steph's early years in the NBA were marked by recurring injuries that threatened his future in the sport. Surgeries, rehabilitation, constant doubts. She had been by his side throughout the process. "It was a difficult time," she agreed. "But what does that have to do with your secret in Charlotte?" Steph hesitated, as if organizing thoughts long kept to himself. "In 2014, I returned to Charlotte for All-Star Weekend. It was special because it was my first selection, and it happened in the city where I grew up." He paused. "During that weekend, I reconnected with Jason Williams." "Your high school teammate?" asked Ayesha, recalling the name. "Yes, but he wasn't there as a spectator. He was working as a janitor at the event." Steph shook his head, the discomfort evident on his face. "Jason had as much talent as I did, Ayesha. Maybe even more. Everyone bet he would make it to the NBA." "What happened to him?" "Knee injury during his senior year of high school. No adequate health insurance, no resources for proper surgery and rehabilitation." Steph took a deep breath. "While I was receiving the best possible medical treatment for my ankles, thanks to my contract with the Warriors, Jason lost everything because of a similar injury." Ayesha observed her husband attentively, beginning to glimpse the bigger picture forming. "We talked for hours that day," continued Steph. "He told me about other young talents from our neighborhood who had the same fate. Promising athletes whose potential was destroyed by injuries that could have been properly treated if they had resources." The flight proceeded with Steph gradually revealing how that encounter had profoundly transformed him. How, at the ETB8 height of his first great season in the NBA, he decided to use part of his growing wealth to make a difference in a very personal way. When the plane landed in Charlotte, the tension between them had diminished, replaced by an apprehensive expectation. A car was already waiting for them, and Steph took the wheel, driving them through streets that brought back memories of his youth. "The city has changed so much," he commented, as they passed through the renovated center of Charlotte. "When I grew up here, this neighborhood was completely different." Gradually, the skyscrapers gave way to residential areas, and finally they arrived at a lower middle-class neighborhood. Steph parked in front of a modest two-story building, well-maintained but with nothing that would draw special attention. "This is it," he said simply, turning off the engine. Ayesha observed the place with curiosity. A discreet sign at the entrance indicated Horizon Sports Rehabilitation Center. Nothing about the place suggested a connection to Steph Curry or any celebrity. A middle-aged African-American man was waiting for them at the entrance, smiling widely upon seeing Steph. The two embraced with familiarity. "Jason, this is Ayesha," Steph introduced, with an unusual nervousness in his voice. "Finally!" exclaimed Jason, extending his hand to Ayesha. "After all these years, it's a pleasure to meet the woman behind the man." "The pleasure is mine," Ayesha responded mechanically, still trying to process the situation. "Although, apparently, I'm the last to know about." All of this. Jason gave Steph a questioning look, who nodded discreetly. Well, let's show you what your husband has been doing in secret all these years, said Jason, leading them inside. The interior of the building was surprisingly modern and well-equipped. They passed through a reception where a young woman greeted Steph by name, without showing any surprise at his presence. It was evident that his visits there were not uncommon. We started small, explained Jason as they walked. Just a room with basic physiotherapy equipment. Now we have this. They entered a spacious gymnasium where young people of different ages were performing rehabilitation exercises under the supervision of physiotherapists. State-of-the-art equipment occupied the space, comparable to any professional center. We serve about 50 teenage athletes per year, continued Jason, all with serious injuries that, without proper treatment, would end their sporting careers before they even began. And all receive free treatment? Asked Ayesha, impressed with the scale of the operation. Completely free, confirmed Jason, from the initial surgery to the complete rehabilitation. We also offer educational support and guidance for university scholarships. They continued the tour through the building, passing through treatment rooms, medical offices, and even a small dormitory for patients who came from other cities. In each space, Ayesha noticed framed photos of young athletes, some of whom she vaguely recognized from university programs. "Is that DeAndre Johnson?" she asked, pointing to one of the photos. "Yes," Steph replied with a proud smile. "Our third patient, anterior cruciate ligament tear during high school. Now he's a starter at the University of North Carolina and will probably be chosen in the next NBA draft." As they progressed through the facility, Ayesha began to understand the magnitude of what Steph had created. It wasn't just a clinic, but a complete program that transformed lives. In a physiotherapy room, a girl of approximately 16 years was working hard on recovery exercises for her shoulder. Upon seeing Steph, her face lit up. "Mr. C!" she exclaimed, interrupting her session. "I didn't know you were coming today." "Hey, Zoe, how's the shoulder?" asked Steph, approaching to greet her naturally, without any trace of the NBA superstar, just genuine interest. "Getting better every day," the young girl responded enthusiastically. "The coach said I can return to pitching within a month." "That's fantastic," Steph smiled, then turned to Ayesha. "Zoe is one of the best softball pitchers in the state. She injured her shoulder in the state finals." "And I'll come back better than ever, thanks to this place," added Zoe, looking at Ayesha with curiosity. "Are you Mrs. Curry? Wow, I love your cooking show." Ayesha thanked her for the compliment, a confused emotion taking hold of her. Seeing Steph's natural interaction with the young athlete, his genuine commitment to her recovery, awakened a mix of pride and pain. Pride for the incredible work her husband was doing, pain for having been kept apart from it for so long. When they concluded the tour, they went to Jason's office for a private conversation. The walls were decorated with even more photos of graduates of the program, as Jason called them. "Why, Steph?" Ayesha finally asked, her voice low but firm. "Why keep this secret from me, from your family, for 11 years?" Steph exchanged a look with Jason, who nodded discreetly and left the room, leaving them alone. "At the beginning," Steph started, "it was for fear that it wouldn't work out. I was investing a lot of money in something that could fail. And after it started to succeed? After," he hesitated, "after, it was for fear that it would become public, that the media would find out and turn this into just another sports star does charity story." Ayesha shook her head, confused. "And what would be the problem with that? You're doing something wonderful here." "Exactly that," Steph replied, running his hand through his hair in a nervous gesture. I wanted it to be just about these boys and girls, not about me. The moment my name was publicly associated with this place, everything would change. Reporters, cameras, people wanting to use the center to get close to me. He paused. And mainly, I didn't want these young people to feel they were receiving charity from a celebrity. I wanted them to see this as something they deserved for their own talent and effort. Ayesha absorbed his words, partially understanding his motives, but still hurt. "That explains why you kept it away from the public," she finally said. "It doesn't explain why you hid it from me. I'm your wife, Steph." Steph lowered his eyes, the guilt evident on his face. "In the early days of our marriage, you were building your own career, dealing with the public, exposure that came with my growing success. Then came the children, your projects, books, shows." He sighed deeply. "And honestly, this place became my refuge. The only space where I was just Mr. C, not Steph Curry, NBA star, celebrity, public figure. Here I could make a difference without spotlights, without expectations. Selfishly, perhaps, I wanted to preserve that." A heavy silence fell between them. Through the office window, Ayesha observed the young athletes in the gymnasium, their determined expressions during the rehabilitation exercises. 11 years of secrecy, 11 years of transformed lives. "There were times when I almost told you," continued Steph, breaking the silence. "Like when DeAndre was accepted to UNC with a full scholarship, or when our first patient, Melissa, returned as a volunteer physiotherapist after graduating. I wanted to share these victories with you." "Why didn't you share?" asked Ayesha, turning to face him directly. "Because each year, that past made it harder to explain why I kept the secret for so long," admitted Steph. "How to explain that I hid something so significant from the person I love most in the world? I simply couldn't find the words." Ayesha felt tears in her eyes, no longer of anger or betrayal, but of a complex sadness for the invisible barrier that had existed in their marriage without her knowing. "I don't know what to say, Steph," she finally confessed. "I'm proud of what you've built here. It's truly amazing, but I also feel excluded from a fundamental part of your life." Steph extended his hand hesitantly across the table, a gesture of reconciliation. After a moment of hesitation, Ayesha intertwined her fingers with his. "There's one more thing I need to show you," said Steph softly. "The real reason why it all began." The sun was beginning to set when Steph led Ayesha to a small garden at the back of the clinic. The tranquil space contrasted with the intense activity of the rehabilitation center. In the center of the garden was a stone bench with a discreet plaque. "In memory of Marcus Jenkins, 1988 to 2006. His talent inspired. His story will transform lives." Steph sat on the bench, inviting Ayesha to join him. The Charlotte sky was painted in shades of orange and red, creating an almost solemn atmosphere for the moment. "Marcus was my best friend in high school," began Steph, his voice low and controlled, but laden with emotion. "We played together on the school team. He was extraordinary, the kind of natural talent that appears once in a generation." Ayesha listened attentively. In all the years of marriage, Steph had mentioned various childhood friends, but never this name. "In our junior year, Marcus suffered a meniscus injury during an important game. University scouts were present. It was his big chance." Steph paused, breathing deeply to control his emotion. His family didn't have adequate medical insurance. The school doctor recommended rest and anti-inflammatories, saying he could return to play in a few weeks. But that wasn't the correct treatment, guessed Ayesha. No, he needed surgery and specialized physiotherapy. Steph slowly shook his head. Marcus returned to the courts prematurely, determined not to miss other opportunities to be seen by recruiters. In the first game after returning, his knee gave way completely. Ayesha could see the pain in her husband's eyes, an old wound that clearly had never completely healed. Without proper treatment options, without resources for the necessary rehabilitation, he lost the chance to play in college. He lost all the scholarships that were practically guaranteed. Steph looked toward the horizon. The following year, I received my scholarship to Davidson. Marcus was working at a convenience store to help his family. "What happened to him?" asked Ayesha softly. Steph's face hardened. Depression, pain medications that turned into addiction. In 2006, while I was preparing for my first year at university, Marcus died of an overdose. Ayesha brought her hand to her mouth, shocked. "Steph, I'm so sorry. I never imagined." "No one imagines," he replied, his voice breaking. "It's a story that repeats itself in communities like the one where I grew up. Extraordinary talents lost due to lack of adequate medical resources." Steph pointed to the building behind them. "When I found Jason in 2014, and he told me about similar cases still occurring, I knew I needed to do something. I couldn't bring Marcus back, but I could prevent his story from repeating itself." Ayesha took her husband's hands in hers, finally understanding the emotional depth behind the secret. "Why did you never tell me about Marcus before?" Steph closed his eyes for a moment. "Because I failed him. I was so focused on my own career that I didn't realize how much he was suffering until it was too late." A tear ran down the face of the man that millions admired for his strength and composure. "When we started dating, I was already the prodigy boy from Davidson. I didn't want you to know about this part of my past, about my greatest regret." Ayesha hugged her husband, feeling his body tremble slightly with the emotion contained for so many years. "And the more time passed," continued Steph, "the harder it became to share this story. How to explain that I hid something so fundamental about myself?" For a few minutes, they remained in silence, embracing, on the bench under the darkening sky. Ayesha processed everything she had discovered in the last 24 hours. The rehabilitation center, the young athletes, and now, the painful story that had motivated it all. "I understand why it was difficult to talk about Marcus," Ayesha finally said. "But the center, the incredible work you're doing, why not share that with me?" Steph gently moved away to look her in the eyes. "At the beginning, as I said, I feared it would fail. Then, when it started to work out, it became increasingly difficult to explain why I kept it secret." He paused. "And, to be completely honest, I was afraid." "Afraid of what?" "Afraid that you would want to turn this into something public, part of our brand as a couple. You've always been so talented at transforming our stories into something inspiring for others." Steph carefully chose his words. "I feared that the center would lose its original purpose and become just another public relations project." Ayesha felt a pang of pain with the admission. There was truth in Steph's words. She really did have a talent for transforming personal experiences into public platforms, as she had done with her cooking show and books. "You didn't trust that I would respect that," she stated, "not as an accusation, but as an acknowledgement of a reality." "I should have trusted," admitted Steph. "It was my mistake, not yours. I let fear and guilt dictate my decisions, instead of our partnership." At that moment, they were interrupted by Jason, who was approaching with a young man, appearing about 25 years old. "Sorry to interrupt," said Jason, "but Tyrone insisted on greeting you before leaving. He was one of our first patients." The young man extended his hand to Steph with a broad smile. "Mr. C, I just stopped by to thank you again. I heard that Mrs. Curry finally got to see the center." "Tyrone is finishing his master's degree in sports physiotherapy," Jason explained proudly. "He comes every week as a volunteer." "It's the least I can do," replied Tyrone, turning to Ayesha. "If it weren't for this place, I'd probably be working at some fast food joint now. Ruptured Achilles tendon at 17. Doctors said I would never play basketball again." "And now?" asked Ayesha, genuinely interested. "I didn't make it to the NBA as I dreamed," laughed Tyrone. "But I played 4 years in college with a full scholarship. Now I'm about to become a physiotherapist to help other athletes like me." After Jason and Tyrone's departure, Ayesha and Steph remained in the garden, watching the first stars appear in the night sky of Charlotte. 11 years, murmured Ayesha. "So many stories like Tyrone's that you experienced alone?" Steph nodded slowly. "It was wrong to keep this from you. I see that clearly now." "Yes, it was," agreed Ayesha, her voice firm but gentle. "Marriage means sharing not just the joys and achievements, but also the pains and personal projects." She paused, looking at the illuminated building. "But I understand better now why it was so difficult for you." The silence that followed was no longer as tense as before, but contemplative. Both reflected on what they had learned. Steph about trust and vulnerability, Ayesha about the complexities of choices we make and the secrets we keep, even from those closest to us. "What do we do now?" Steph finally asked. Ayesha thought for a moment. "First, we need to be honest with each other. Completely honest. No more secrets, however well-intentioned they may be." Steph nodded in agreement. "Second," she continued, "I want to be part of this from now on." Seeing Steph's hesitant expression, she clarified, "Not to transform it into something public or associate it with our image. I deeply respect what you created here and why it needs to remain as it is." "How do you envision your participation then?" asked Steph cautiously. "I realized something important is missing from the program," replied Ayesha, a slight smile appearing on her lips. "These young athletes need to learn about proper nutrition to complement their physical recovery." Steph's eyes lit up with understanding. "A nutritional program?" "Exactly. I can develop a specific curriculum, teach the basics of nutrition for athletic performance." Enthusiasm grew in her voice. "Not as Ayesha Curry, celebrity, but just as a nutritionist. I could come here regularly, work directly with the athletes." For the first time since she had discovered the box, in the basement, Ayesha saw Steph's genuine smile return. Not the public smile he showed in interviews and commercials, but the one reserved for moments of true personal happiness. "It would be perfect," he agreed, squeezing her hand. "The doctors always say nutrition is fundamental for proper recovery." During the flight back to California the next day, the atmosphere between them was completely different. They talked animatedly about plans for the future of the center, sharing ideas and possibilities. "I've been thinking," said Ayesha as they flew over the Rocky Mountains, "maybe it's time to tell the children. Not the public, but our family." Steph considered the suggestion. "Riley is getting older. Maybe it would be a good lesson about the importance of helping others discreetly without seeking recognition. And about using your privileges to create opportunities for those who don't have them," added Ayesha. 3 months later, the complete Curry family visited the Horizon Sports Rehabilitation Center for the first time. Riley, fascinated by the equipment and the stories of the young athletes, helped her mother explain basic principles of nutrition to a group of teenagers. Ryan distributed healthy snacks they had prepared together in the newly inaugurated demonstration kitchen, Ayesha's first official contribution to the center. Cannon, although too young to completely understand, ran through the gymnasium, charming everyone with his enthusiasm. In a quiet moment, Ayesha found Steph observing the scene with contained tears in his eyes. "What are you thinking about?" she asked, approaching him. "About how something that began with so much pain and guilt transformed into something so beautiful," he replied, embracing her. "And about how foolish I was not to share this with you from the beginning. Sometimes, even the most well-intentioned secrets can create barriers," reflected Ayesha. "But we're here now, together. That's what matters." That night, while the children slept in the small apartment maintained by Steph near the center, the couple sat again in the memorial garden. The plaque in honor of Marcus shone under the soft light of the lampposts. "He would be proud," said Ayesha softly, "of what you built in his memory, of the lives you've transformed." Steph nodded, looking at the starry sky. "You know what I've learned in these last few months? That carrying a burden alone, even when we believe we're protecting others, ends up creating distance. Sharing not only divides the weight, but multiplies the joy. And now it's no longer just your project or your secret," smiled Ayesha. "It's part of our family's legacy." As they went back inside, passing through corridors where dozens of young people had received a second chance, Steph reflected on how his greatest regret had transformed into his most significant work, and how, finally, after 11 years, it was no longer a secret he carried alone, but a shared mission with the person he loved most in the world. The legacy of Marcus Jenkins continued to live on, not only in the clinic that carried his inspiration, but now also in the renewed commitment of a couple who had learned that even the most well-intentioned secrets cannot compare to the strength of shared truth and rebuilt trust.